Okay, I want to finish up this topic of competition politics versus democracy and how you assemble the governing institutions of both. I'm going to play with my hair a minute. And I want to concentrate on why it's free to assemble the government the way that it's actually established by the Constitution of the United States. And the reason is simple. There are no competitive assembly electoral processes in the Constitution of the United States, just zero. There are no seats to be won because all the composition, the House is apportioned by population. So there's nothing to, it's all specified is what I'm trying to say, okay? And then once you assemble the most numerous legislative branch in your state legislature, which is a requirement by Article 4, Section 4, that every state's legislature must be a Republican form of government, which means that the most numerous legislative branch must be an exact representation of the population of the state. Okay? You don't have a competition for who is represented and who isn't. Everyone is entitled to be represented as part of the representation. So when the state assembles the most numerous legislative branch, they have to do it in a way that they form a representation of the whole population. Representation. The difference between a representative and a representation is a representative is someone you hire to advocate for your interest. And a representation is an exact, it's the same as the original. Exactly. Only smaller. Why? Because all the people can't assemble. You have a state like Colorado with 5.5 million people, and they cannot have a quorum of those people show up to the legislative, to assemble as a legislative assembly. Because a quorum has to be at least 50% and can be, depending on whether it's a democracy or if it's a republic, it can be as high as 2/3 or 70% must participate in the quorum, because it has a difference. There's a difference between a quorum and the majority consensus. The quorum just identifies and ranks choices, makes cost-benefit analysis, determines the scope and cost of any measure. That's what the quorum does. And in a Republican form of government, which is a bicameral legislature, that quorum requirement is the responsibility of the most numerous legislative branch. That's where they form a quorum of all the people, because the most numerous legislative branch has to be an exact representation of the population. That means that you're there through representation. When they have 1 for 30,000 as the representative density, each representative in the House only represents 30,000 people. Okay? But you have that thing about qualified electorate. Okay? What does Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1 say? It says that the qualified electorate will be the same as what formed the state's most numerous legislative branch. They didn't say what the representative density is in the state. The federal representative density is 1 for 30,000. But depending on the size of the state, the larger the state, the lower the representative density has to be. The smaller the state, the higher representative density will have to be. To do what? To form an exact representation of the population that form that most numerous legislative branch. So back when the Constitution was written, the state of Massachusetts had about 400,000 people. And they had a representative density to form the most numerous legislative branch in their state of 1 representative for every 1,000 people, which gave them 400 representatives in the state's legislature. Colorado could do the same thing. They have 5.5 million people. They could have a representative density, I think would be maybe 1 for 100,000 or something, but you would get 550 representatives, which would be the whole number, because the calculation for how to choose, how to assemble is that every district, where the districts in the federal legislature are the states themselves. Each state is a district. On the state legislature, each district would be a county, if they have counties. Whatever way that they districtize the state, if it's by county, then every county is a district. And based on the number of people in that county, gives a percentage based on the numeration, which tells us the total population of the state. Then it tells you the proportion of the state population that lives in each county. Now, when you convert that percentage into a whole number of representatives, you need a proportionality constant. That proportionality constant is the representative density. When you divide the population by the representative density, it will give you a fractional number, like 550.8 people, representatives. So you need to understand what to do with the fractional representative. How do you determine what to do with it? Do you round it up or do you truncate it? Well, the first boundary condition is not to exceed the proportionality constant, which means that you have to truncate the fractional representative because rounding up will exceed the representative density. Then, what if one of the counties has less population than the proportionality constant, which will only calculate a fractional representative, which will be truncated by the first boundary condition, leaving that district with 0 representation. In that specific case, then that county or that district is entitled to 1 representative. Okay, that's the second boundary condition. So it takes care of both conditions that may exist, that of fractional representatives and that of less than the proportionality constant of only fractional representatives. But once you calculate that whole number of representatives each district is entitled, then that needs to be compared with the percentage that you calculated by the enumeration. So the percentage you calculate by the enumeration has to equal the percentage that you calculate by the proportion of the whole number of representatives as to the whole number, the aggregate whole number of representatives. Okay? That's your check. What's the error in that calculation? The error in that calculation is the truncated fractional representatives. That's the only error you have. So if you have a lot of error, or if you don't actually form an exact representation, then you have to change the proportionality constant in order to ensure that both conditions are met. Okay? So that isn't competitive at all, because no matter how you do it, you have a requirement that it must be an exact representation of the population, the total demographic diversity of the representation of the people. Okay? And then what? Well, once you've made that representation, an exact representation, the people in their collective capacity assembled as the most numerous legislative branch, then they together assemble the rest of the government, meaning all senators, state and federal, the president, everybody else in government is assembled by either the most numerous legislative branch of the state or the most numerous legislative branch of the federal government. And that includes the electors, which determine the number of choices each state is entitled to make. Because every state is entitled to a number of choices to choose the president and the vice president that are separate from the other states. You don't combine lists or go from a list of people. No, your state has the right to choose a number of persons equal to 2 times the number of the whole number of representatives and senators that state has in Congress. That's how many choices they have. Now, if they did it purely democratically, the number of choices would be a fixed number. Like they would say, every state must make 5 choices from within their own state. And then they would narrow that number down to 5 persons. And then the states would consider those 5 persons to make the choice by vote. 1 vote per state, and a majority of all the states is necessary to the choice. So everybody on that list is somebody that the states believe, and the people of the states believe, is qualified for that office and suitable, that they can vote for. You don't have people voting against. And the way you narrow that list, because if they did 3 per state from within their own state, they would narrow that down to 1 per state. And then they would rank the list by each state voting for other people on the list other than their own person. And then when they rank the list, they would only take the top 5 persons off the list for them to consider to determine the choice by vote, 1 vote per state. So they're voting for people that they already have agreed are qualified and suitable for the position. They're in total agreement because of the way they ranked the list. A majority ranked those 5 people as the best. And then they choose, they deliberate over those 5 people, their pluses and minuses, and then they make the choice. The same is true for all executive department principal officers. The president only nominates. The president does not make the choice. Okay? How many do they have to nominate? Well, the states assembled in the Senate will not only tell the president how many nominees they want to consider, just like any other hiring managers in panel, but what the qualifications are that each of those nominees must have. Okay? Same for the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, it's the same way. Every state must have 1 justice in the pool that can be chosen to hear and decide the case. Why? Because the states have agreed to have their conflicts and disputes and their grievances adjudicated and decided by those people. So they have to participate and have somebody that they agree with in the pool. If they don't, they're not going to agree to abide by the decision. Okay? And then that pool needs to be reduced to the 5 judges that will hear and decide the case. Is the Supreme Court justice, a Chief Justice, one of that number? No. The Supreme Court justice is a president. He presides over the proceedings of the Supreme Court to make sure that those proceedings are conducted properly. He does not participate in the decision. Presidents preside. They do not participate. Same way with the President of the United States. He does not participate in any aspect of our government. Doesn't participate. Yes, when a treaty is being negotiated, the president is empowered to be the negotiator. Who gets his instructions from the states as they are assembled in the Senate? And it takes 2/3 of the senators present, which is 2/3 of the states, because the states have equal suffrage in the Senate, not their individual senators, to concur on their wanting to have those discussions and the parameters of those discussions and what constitutes an agreement. And if there is some type of amendment that is requested, the president has to bring that amendment to Congress, to the Senate, for their consideration. And they will decide whether or not they're willing to change the parameters and what constitutes an agreement. Not the president. President doesn't participate in that. That's what advice and consent is all about. By and with. By and with is before and during, not after. And while we're on this subject, when it comes to committees, every state has a right to have one of their own representatives or senators on every committee. And you cannot have a committee chairman with authority to do anything. And they cannot vote in the committee to determine the choices. They can only prepare a cost-benefit analysis or scope and cost relationship benefits, relationships in the committee. For who to consider? For the states to consider in the full Congress or the full Senate or the full House. There's none of this gang of nine or democratic control of the House and Senate or none of that. This is a democracy. A democracy. And the states are assembled as equals with equal suffrage in the democracy, which means that they have the right to participate as equals in every aspect of the government. Every. I don't care what the Democrats and Republicans think or want. It's the states assembled in Congress as the union that make those decisions. Not the Democrats and Republicans. And definitely not a president. Even the President of the United States. Even the president as the commander-in-chief, he still has a boss. It's the union. He doesn't decide what to do. He has to get authority to do what the states as the union want to do. Not the president. Okay? So, it never costs any money because there's no campaigns. A person can waste their time campaigning, but there's no campaign. So there's no cost. I'm going to end it there for part 3. Bye.